Hello, everybody, and welcome to Walking Between Shadows. I'm Taryn Elliott, and along with me is my amazing husband.
I'm Ben Elliott.
And we're here to talk about true crime all the time.
Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and thanks again for listening.
We're going back tonight to 1993, to West Memphis, Arkansas, to the south, to a small, strict Bible Belt town where the neighborhood kids ride bikes and play until the street lights come on. Those street lights were our reminders from our mother to come inside. But on May 5th, 1993, 8-year-olds Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Chris Byers wouldn't be home when those street lights came on. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Taryn.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm with you, so I'm good.
I'm so excited that you're here with me on this one.
I know it's been a minute since we've done one like this.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of researching on this case, and this one's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, this was a big deal to us. It's, again, near our hometown and all over the news constantly.
All over. It was in 1993, so I was actually having a baby in 1993, who is now 30 years old.
Yeah.
And you were like in the 8th grade?
I was in the 8th grade.
That doesn't sound too good, does it, for us?
Well, but hey, you know what? It's good. It's all good.
It is good. It's
right.
Good now.
Right. So this case, this West Memphis 3, garnered national attention, global attention.
Yeah, it went wild.
Yeah.
It went wild.
Yeah. And so it really, what I remember the most about it was seeing the billboards up and down I-40 even.
Yeah, and all the, Johnny Depp and Eddie Vedder and, just tons of people that were just swarming to try to help these guys after, Yeah,
and one superstar, Natalie Maines from the Dixie Chicks, she had a pretty interesting crossroads during this case.
Yes, she did. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we get on into the case. So.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Well, so I remember it, and I remember a lot of it a certain way too.
Yeah.
Again, I was young enough that it really didn't register, and I just kind of saw it and heard it.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we've been doing this for almost a year, I've definitely read into it a little more than I probably would have otherwise.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, and we're in a new place, so we've never recorded here before, so this is new to us, and I'm trying to feel like to get in my element. I'm used to doing it from the bed. Like for the past several months, we've been doing this from our bed,
right?
And or from our home anyway.
Our home, yeah.
Now we've moved down to your office, and we're gonna.
Well, we're excited. We're putting together this new podcast studio, and like this is really the first setup that we've had.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a test, but we're really recording this.
Yes, we are.
The other part of it is this is also where our sponsorship comes from too.
That's right.
And so we're excited that they're giving us the opportunity to do this on site here at the office structure, and looking forward to featuring some of the products from ECT and the benefit system. So we want to definitely shout out to them and say thank you for the time and the studio space.
Thank y'all so much.
Yep. And so with that, let's jump into it.
Let's get into this case.
Yeah.
So like we said, we're talking about the West Memphis 3 today. And this was one of the most famous cases that you can, that it was everywhere. It was everywhere. This takes place in West Memphis, Arkansas, which is directly across from the Mississippi River from Memphis, Tennessee.
Right.
So it's a very small town, Bible Belt community, Christians, and kids would go outside and play until the street lights came on, and that was normal. That was very normal for them to do. And on May the 5th of 1993, Stevie Branch and Michael Moore and Christopher Byers, 8 years old, all second graders at Weaver Elementary School in West Memphis, Arkansas. They were Cub Scouts, and they were all three the best of friends. After school that day, they all went out playing, riding bikes, and running around the neighborhood, but they never came home. They never came home that night. And so police were called around 7 o'clock, I believe, by Michael Moore's parents. Called him in missing, and the search went on that night for several hours, but really did not kick off until the next morning.
Yeah.
So the next morning, May the 6th, everybody's looking, and they're looking in an area called Robin Hood Hills.
So before you go any further, they only one set of parents had called one child in missing, or did they report all of them missing?
Okay, so all of them reported missing, but Michael Moore's parents first called them in.
Gotcha.
And then about an hour later, Stevie Branch's stepfather, Terry Hobbs, called into the police. So, like I said, these kids were out playing. They never came back. And the community was freaking out. May the 6th, the next morning, everybody's looking in the community. The police are looking, and the day goes by, and the morning goes by, and come that afternoon, a parole officer by the name of Steve Jones, who was helping search at Robin Hood Hills for these boys, saw a tennis shoe, looked like a boy's tennis shoe, in the creek, and went down in there. It was like not really a creek, it was more like a ditch, or help me here, drainage ditch
like
kind of.
Like a drainage ditch,
but
for flooding or something.
Right.
So it didn't have water in it all the time. It was just, if too much rain fell, it would...
I think it did most of the time have water in it, but we're looking at Arkansas, and I don't know if it's kind of, swampy.
That's some lowland, some swampy areas.
Right. So, it stayed pretty wet down through there. Well, this Steve Jones was searching and saw this tennis shoe, and he goes down into this ditch or this, creek, whatever you want to call it, and steps down on the tennis shoe. And when he does that, he gets tangled up in one of the boys' bodies.
Yeah. So as he went down in that ditch looking for the boys, he stepped into water. Like water was up in the ditch. He didn't see them. He just saw a tennis shoe, stepped in that water, and got tangled up.
Right. Yeah. Gosh. That would be horrifying. I can't even imagine. That's when all three of the boys were found. The boys' bodies were tied together. Not tied together, I'm sorry. The boys' bodies were all found naked and hog-tied. So it was right wrist to right ankle, and then left wrist to left ankle, with their shoelaces. The clothes were found scattered all around the creek, and one of the boys, Chris Byers, actually had the worst injuries. He had been mutilated in his groin area, plus lacerations and wounds all over his little body. Chris Byers died from knife injuries, but the other two boys actually died from drowning. Mm-hmm. Now, I have read a little bit and heard a little bit that luminol tests were done in this area, and it showed that around that area, that's where the crime happened. But I've only heard that in one report. Yeah,
because other reports conflict completely, like there was no blood.
Right. They weren't able to find, and they were, where was the crime scene at?
Yeah.
But now, like I said, one report I read that there was a luminol test done around that creek area, and they found all kinds of blood.
Right.
But investigators didn't find any drag marks or evidence that the boys had been taken to this area of Robin Hood Hills. They were attacked where they were playing. That's what they believed. All the boys were tied up, and the knots for each boy were different. So there was half hitches on some, and there was I forgot what they're called, but it's a little bit different. They're very easy knots to do. It's not like you have to be a big outdoorsman or anything like that. It's just they were different. And this kind of started making the police and investigators think that this could have been three people.
Yeah.
Because how do you restrain three little boys? They're wild. These little kids, running wild. How do you restrain three little boys and keep them in one area? And they're watching this be done, by one person. But if it was done by more.
Right. And there's two trains of thought here. one, kids that young are going to get so scared they run away, or they're going to get so scared they freeze.
Right.
And that's what, you know, half the investigators thought one way and half the investigators thought the other way.
Right. Immediately, rumors started to fly through the town, mainly that this was an act of a satanic cult. And you remember this satanic cult stuff. I mean...
Yeah, but why did they think that?
Because of Chris Byers' injuries to his groin.
Well, it wasn't injuries to the groin. I think we need to say it. His scrotum was removed.
Right.
And at first look, they thought his penis had been removed, but it hadn't. It had just been de-skinned.
Right.
So, and the medical examiner got up in court and explained this step by step with photos of it and all that stuff.
Yeah, and we saw some of these photos of the crime scene and the autopsy photos, and if y'all want to look at those, you can find them online. I don't want to share those.
Yeah.
It's really bad, and I feel like these boys have been pretty violated already, you know. But like I said, so this satanic cult rumors started flying, and it seems like so many crimes back in around this time were being blamed on that. You can remember the church burnings and the everybody that was murdered, it was a satanic cult, especially in the South.
Yeah.
I mean, we grew up in, like you said, right there beside West Memphis, Arkansas, very much the same as where we grew up, a small town.
Right. And during this time, you've had a saying about it that during this time, satanic panic was going on all over the Mid-South. It
was. People were going bananas over this stuff, and these stories were spreading like crazy. I mean, this was a Bible Belt, of course, like we talked about town, and people pointed to the devil for all this. How could you do this to 3 little boys? And, you know, you have to be evil. Well, you do, but that doesn't mean you're, you know, part of a satanic cult. When the rumors of the satanic cults were spreading quickly, tips from the police were also coming in very quickly. One person that was pointed out to the police was Damien Eccles. He was 18 years old at the time. He was a so-called dark person that listened to Metallica and Slayer and Megadeth. A lot of stuff that, you know, a lot of people like.
Right.
And
that was some of my favorite music, and
I
wasn't into Satanism.
No, I mean, and it wasn't, Metallica's not even that.
No.
I mean, like, I think about it now, and I'm like, yeah, that's nothing. That's nothing. But people did, and we were all, I remember being scared of the satanic cults. I mean, because that's all we heard about at that time.
Well, but also at this time we had the trench coat mafias.
We did have the trench coat mafia.
Oh, yeah. The black dress, the long black coats.
And they changed that to emo now. I think people call that emo.
I don't know. I've heard it, but okay. I'll go with that.
You're telling your age. And, yeah.
Yeah.
But they call them emos now.
Okay.
But we called them trench coat mafias.
Yeah. And they like
goth.
It was another word. Yeah.
Right.
Black hair, black makeup, black fingernails.
It wasn't just rumors that brought though Damien Eccles to the police station. And I've heard this in some reports, and I've not heard it in others. We
binge watched all of
Paradise
Lost, all 3 of them. Yeah.
And this was not mentioned in Paradise Lost. And a lot of people will say, well, they didn't want to cover it in Paradise Lost because these were the people that were really pushing for these boys to be, you know, released. But anyway, so I have heard that Damien Eccles' girlfriend's aunt at the time called the police and said that she was an eyewitness to Damien leaving Robin Hood Hills covered in mud.
Yeah.
At 9 p.m. on May the 5th. So either she hated Damien Eccles or he was out there at 9 p.m. covered in mud.
Well, wasn't that girlfriend of his that was her daughter pregnant at the time?
Well, it was her niece.
Her niece. So it was her aunt. All right, so that girl was pregnant by Damien Eccles at the time too. So she probably had a little bit of motive to hate on him.
Yeah, didn't really like him too much, but that's kind of pushing it. I mean, I mean, and what was she doing down there at Robin Hood Hills?
Well, she was at Bojangles getting chicken.
Yeah. Yeah, it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
So the first person they had in was Damien Eccles, and they're questioning him and they're asking him all these things. And I do believe that the cops dropped the ball with it. I know that Damien Eccles kind of did have an attitude, and he was known to be dark and all these things, but I just don't think that West Memphis, Arkansas, the police or the Crittenden County Sheriff's Department was capable of handling this case. It's this huge of a case.
Yeah.
And during that time, I found out that West Memphis, Arkansas was being investigated by state police for evidence being stolen out of the evidence room, guns being stolen out of the evidence room by drug task force officers and some deputies. So during the time that these 3 8-year-olds were murdered, they were under investigation. West Memphis, Arkansas.
Yeah, the police department.
And the sheriff's department, Crittenden County as well. So the local authorities were under investigation. And when the state police came in and asked can I help y'all with this case? We need to help y'all with this case.
Right.
They refused. So local authorities completely refused. We do not want your help. We don't want you involved.
What about, was the FBI involved? Because
No,
that's
I don't-
something I've never heard.
I'd never heard they were involved either. And you would think, with it being right there on the Arkansas-Tennessee line, with those two freeways right in between, Robin Hood Hills, and the truck stop and all these things that were there, you would think that they would absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's capital murder, it's kidnapping, it's a lot of things that the FBI almost automatically gets involved in.
Right. Never heard.
And yet there's nothing ever said about them.
Right.
I think there was a little bit of investigative work done later on in the post-conviction appeals, but we can get to that a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's odd that the FBI was not involved.
No, right. So Damien's on their radar, and they find out a few more things about Damien. He has severe mental issues at the time, and he knew he couldn't work, so he filed for disability. And when he filed for disability, it's about a year before these murders occurred.
So he would have been 17,
right,
filing for disability.
Right, by himself.
Yeah.
Damien, when he filed for disability, he told the Social Security Administration that he was depressive, suicidal, homicidal, schizophrenic, and sociopathic.
Mm-hmm.
His mental health record is 500 pages long and was before
Suspected
he was
in this case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very extensive. His parents had expressed concern in Damien's involvement with devil worship and witchcraft.
Yeah.
His record at school was of violence towards teachers and other students. One thing about Damien that people knew is that, and this is something I've heard, and I've only heard it through a couple sources, but that one day Damien was in detention after school, and one kid that was in there with him decided to cut his wrists.
No shit.
In class, in
Yeah.
detention, and Damien grabbed his wrist and started sucking his blood.
Oh God.
I don't know if that's true.
But that's just a rumor.
It
right?
sounds very far out. It sounds like some stuff that some of these people might say. But that's what I've heard. None of these things, though, that we've said about Damien, whether he had mental health issues, he liked, Metallica, and he dressed in black, makes him a killer.
Mm-hmm.
None of these things did. I mean, his attitude sucked when the police brought him in.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing I found out is they were having a parole officer interrogate him.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that was really freaking weird.
Do you know if that parole officer ever worked with him on other cases?
Now, I do know that a year before this, that parole officer had gotten in touch with a satanic...
Like a specialist or
specialist.
expert?
And
Yeah.
we watched this guy, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it was nuts.
Well, when he got to court, I mean, in the original trials, when he got to court, they broke him down because he had done a mail order PhD program and admitted to not ever taking any classes for his PhD.
Yeah.
And so, did he in fact write a dissertation
Mm-hmm.
and defend it for
Right.
his PhD? And they proved that he did not. So this
Mm-hmm.
expert they brought in, was just somebody who read lots of books or something like that about Satanism and cult.
But
and then
stuff he
the
was
judge
saying-
even.
The judge.
Yeah.
Look, these people were so, I don't know how to put it, sticks in the mud. I mean, like Bible thumpers that made no sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
They took it to an extreme.
They did.
There's no doubt. And the judge sat right there during that interrogation, or not interrogation, but cross-examination of that expert of the occult. And to the defense attorneys told him, hey, anybody can be an expert if they have experience with it or any of that kind of stuff. So he basically just laughed off the fact that the guy was not formally educated about anything.
Right.
And allowed him to continue testifying as an expert in court.
With his mail order certificate.
PhD, yeah.
Like I said before, Damien was very cocky. And I think like in the parole officer was interrogating him, there was people that were, asking him a lot of questions, and they were kind of stupid, to be honest. I mean, for such a big deal that this was, I mean, the questions they were asking him were just crazy. But one question they did ask him was how the killer must have felt while he was committing these crimes. And Damien said he probably felt good about it and felt good to have that power over what he had done.
Mm-hmm.
Damien also said that the killer probably asked the boys to come out to the woods, that the boys were not big and not smart, and they would have been easy to control. He also said that the killer wouldn't have been too scared if the boys screamed because it was in the woods and it was too close to the expressway and the truck stop.
There was a lot of ambient noise.
Right,
Nobody would have heard anything.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, he was being very cocky, but at the same time, later on he talks about how that was his shell to get through.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it kind of makes sense. You bring a teenage boy in there and you start saying all this crazy stuff that he did not do,
right?
Or he says he did not do, and he's going to be cocky.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the way he took on this problem. Damien Echols was different. He had read some Stephen King books and studied serial killers and things like a lot of us like, and all that was brought up in court. But, I mean, he explained it away pretty well. I mean, like I said, a lot of us do like these kind of things. I do.
Right.
If somebody looked at my search history right now, I'd probably be in a lot of trouble because of the stuff I look up for these
you'd be looking at
podcasts.
murder and all kinds of stuff.
Well, yeah.
They would think you were a sociopath.
I think I had an extensive mental pages, like 500 pages too, huh?
Yeah.
But also Damien's grandmother stated that he was not home that night to the police, that he was out. Even though Damien was suspicious, I think the cops jumped him really quick. I mean, that was just something I think they did. Police became very biased from that point on, and I think they overlooked some very sketchy characters.
Yeah.
There was so much pressure from this small community to get this solved, and there was. I mean, people were freaked out. Nothing like this has ever happened.
Right.
West Memphis, Arkansas, yeah, I mean, there was lots of floods and natural disasters, and I think there was
tornadoes.
Right, like a year before. I think it ruined them economically and the rebuilding and all that. But as far as something like this, this was way out of their league to handle, I believe. So along with, everyone was freaked out and waiting for answers, and that answer became Damien Echols and his two friends, Jason Baldwin, who at the time was 16 years old, and Jesse Miskelly, who was 17 years old at the time. Jesse Miskelly was the main reason that these three were convicted. The three guys were all friends, but there is zero evidence that connected them to the crime scene, and zero evidence that any of these guys were even together that night. Also, Jesse Miskelly had an extremely low IQ. I think they said it was 72. So that's like a 5 or 6 year old. And he was interviewed alone by the police. His dad, they came to arrest him or came to question him. His dad said, yeah, you can take him to and question him, not knowing what was going on.
Right.
And so his dad said, go on and take him in there. And Jesse Miskelly had tons of stories. I mean, they were everywhere. And he just started making shit up after, after 12 hours in interrogation and feeling the way he felt. He was just overwhelmed. And after being in there for just several hours, Jesse confessed to these crimes. June the 3rd was the first day of interviewing Jesse Misskelley, and it only took a few hours before he had made that confession. Now later on he does recant that confession, but he did actually say that he held one of the boys. I believe he said he held Christopher Byers.
Yeah, that he had run away
Michael
or was
Moore.
trying to get away.
Michael Moore.
Yeah, whichever one it was, Michael Moore, that he was trying to get away, and he ran him down and held him. Until
Jason Baldwin and Damian Nichols came, and he claimed that these boys were raped. Now, in the autopsy, there was nothing about these boys being raped at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all over the news. I mean, At first, these boys, these 3 boys had been raped and sexually, mutilated, but that wasn't the case either.
Well, let's go back to Jesse Misskelley for a second in that interrogation. In 12 hours, he really started out telling the story with complete inaccuracy. And every time that they would go through the story of what happened, he would get a little closer to it and a little closer to it. And then finally, he told what was then the truth, according to the investigators and the people interrogating him. Mm-hmm. But in all of that time, they were continuing to shift and add information to him, basically serving him information to get him to say certain things.
Right.
Over a 12-hour period, kid with a 72 IQ, scared to death, probably a little bit excited about it because he doesn't know better. And then the complete dynamic shift that happened over a 12-hour period that this kid was left with.
And it's almost, if you can sit and think about talking to a 5-year-old child and they're not with their parents, and how easy it is to convince them of something.
Yeah.
It's easy to manipulate a child.
Well, our grandkids believe I'm a retired superhero.
Exactly. So there you go. I mean, yeah, they think my name's Tina.
Tina, yeah. But your point is very true. You know, kids are so manipulatable, and this guy, even though he was 17 years old at the time, he was working on a brain of a 5-year-old almost. Yeah. So when you watch the videos of him back then, he's got that childlike, active personality, and also lost.
Yes.
Like he doesn't understand a thing, doesn't know what's going on. All I know is I'm in this box.
Bless his heart. It's very sad.
Yeah.
When you look back on it.
Yeah.
Jesse's father also gave permission for the police to give him a lie detector test. Now, the police said that he failed miserably.
Mm-hmm.
He did not fail miserably. He did not fail. They lied to him and told him he failed.
So that was one of their tactics to get him to admit to doing something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is...
Yeah, that's awful. That's
awful.
Below the belt.
But y'all, there was zero DNA. There was zero DNA linking any of these boys to the crime scene. I mean, nothing. Jesse said that he saw Jason and Damian do this. He recanted all that stuff, but that was it. That's all it took.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it took.
Mm-hmm.
There was no fingerprints, no shoe prints, no hair, nothing connecting these boys. Jesse Misskelley said that he was afraid of the police and he felt forced into this confession that he later recanted. Jesse actually had a strong alibi too at the time. He was in another town that was close by, seen by lots of people.
Mm-hmm. I
mean, at a wrestling match.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a good alibi that night, but Jason and Damian's alibi was a little bit looser, I believe.
Yeah.
There's lots of proof too that the cops did somewhat force this confession on Jesse, and he just went along with them. They were asking loaded questions and guiding Jesse in this direction, that trying to get him to confess that these two other kids were involved too in this murder.
Mm-hmm.
And August 4th of 1993, all three boys pled not guilty to these murders. In this trial, multiple people confessed to lying on the stand. One guy who was in jail with Jesse Miss Kelly made up this big, huge, stupid-ass story. I mean, we heard it.
Yeah.
With these disgusting details that never happened. There was a few other witnesses that claimed they lied as well after on the witness stand. Which, did they get charged for that?
No.
Right. One thing about this case is that there has never been any proof that there was anything, that this had anything to do with the Satanic cult at all.
Yeah.
In this creek where the boys were found, there were these huge snapping turtles and all kinds of weird there's probably snakes.
Well, raccoons, coyotes,
right?
Anything.
Turtles. We've been around them before. Are known for biting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the marks on these boys looked a lot like these turtle
The jaws
bites.
of a turtle.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, and when there's people that were doing tests on their body, and there's people that actually do this, that will take these turtles and let them bite just to see what the bite mark looks like, to compare to bodies and things like that. And these were identical. These were identical to these boys. And it's very possible that these boys were killed and that the injuries to Chris's groin were not made by humans, but by these turtles and other
wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
There was also, during the trial, they said that the kids had been stabbed with this survival knife that was serrated on one side.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they found that knife in a pond, not near the site, but down the road a piece, that knife being serrated, they said that that's what produced these scratch marks.
Mm-hmm.
So there were series of scratches on their skin.
Right.
That in the first trial, they basically lined up with that knife and said that knife was the reason that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we learned later on that, in fact, those are claw marks from animals.
That's right.
Yeah.
That knife was actually found behind Jason Baldwin's home. An hour after they went out there and searched, they found this knife.
Right.
Magically appeared, and that was it for them.
Yep.
And that to me was very sketchy.
Yep.
And all of it's pretty fucking sketchy anyway. But Jason Baldwin and Jesse Miss Kelly were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But Damien Eccles was sentenced to death.
Mm-hmm.
And considering the lack of evidence in this case, I find that freaking crazy to sentence any of them to anything. And I thought now, and I'm not sure, you might be able to tell me, but isn't it when a child is sentenced before they're 18 years old that they can't be sentenced to life anymore? Am I wrong about that?
Oh, I don't know, but he was 18.
Right.
The other two were not.
Right. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's changed, but I'm not 100% sure.
Well, a lot of famous people jumped on the bandwagon right after this trial. So HBO picked up this, story. Mm-hmm. And Eddie Vedder and Johnny Depp and who else?
Natalie Maines.
Well, Natalie Maines ended up joining on a little bit later on. Mm-hmm. But, they all joined on and they started this documentary.
Well, there was a huge contingency of people from all over the place that just came to help. They came to, talk to news broadcasters and lawyers, and they just wanted a presence known there. And they also helped raise funds to pay for their defense counsel.
Right. Concerts and documentaries went down and people started backing up these West Memphis three guys.
Yeah.
I mean, they wanted justice for them.
Yeah.
The point of all this was that many believed that these three were targeted because of their looks or their music or their interests, and none of these things proved that they were murderers or even bad people. In 1996 is when this really got big. Documentaries started, and these guys tried over and over to prove their innocence for years. Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about a few other sketchy characters that could have committed these murders. Our favorite. Who was our favorite character in this that really wasn't? Mark Byers.
The daddy, yes. Oh my God, stepdad.
Right. So
Yeah.
first of all, Mark Byers, who is super
Redneck.
and just over the top. I mean,
and he's a drug head, an alcoholic, and at this point, that's all you know about him.
right. That's all I know. And Melissa Byers, who was on TV all the time, that was Chris Byers' mother. Everyone saw her. Everybody, saw her mourning and going through a lot. She just died. I mean, randomly, of unknown causes.
Yeah.
There were drugs found in her system, and she had a history of drug problems.
But so Mark came out and said that it was drugs that she was prescribed that they found in her system, and that's not true.
No, it's not true.
They did announce from the autopsy that they found drugs that were not prescribed to her, and so his excuse kind of starts falling apart.
Right, and this is when the documentary had come out. So Paradise Lost had come out, and they were on Mark Byers. I mean, they were. And he ended up, there was bite marks on one of the, especially Stevie Branch. So above Stevie Branch's left eye, there was it looked very much like a human bite mark. And Mark Byers has his teeth removed, and he refused doing these bite mark tests for a while, but he did end up taking a lie detector test, and he passed that test. And Mark Byers was on this West Memphis 3. I mean,
he hated them. I mean, it was burning hell, and I mean, he set up a mock grave site and burned their mock graves.
Yes.
I'll shit on your grave and stomp on your grave and spit on your grave. I mean, he was all about sending them to the front row of hell.
Mark Byers also was a drug addict. It was said that he worked as a confidential informant for the Drug Task Force, and also that Christopher Byers was a little wild child, from what I understand. He had ADHD severely and had been to the doctor, and they had prescribed Chris Byers Ritalin at the time. And every time that he would go back to the doctor, it was just getting worse and worse and worse.
For a period of 3 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And the only thing that these doctors could say to this is that he is not getting this medicine, because this should knock him down to,
a little more normal, at least.
A little bit. But he's catching fires at school. I mean, he's fighting kids. He's being a boy with ADHD that needed help. And it's said that Melissa Byers and that Mark Byers were taking his prescription medicine for 3 years.
Yeah, because it has the opposite effect. It's kind of a speed to adults or people that don't have ADHD.
And in 2000, Mark Byers was arrested for selling drugs to a narcotics officer, and he did 8 years in prison. And so he was very sketchy through the whole thing. Right. He ended up, after hating the West Memphis 3 for so long, he ended up jumping on their bandwagon of wanting them to
be free.
Right. Mark Byers passed away about 2 years ago in a car accident. So Melissa Byers and Mark Byers are both gone. So Christopher Byers has no parents left. That's really sad. So let's see. Another thing about Chris Byers, or Mark Byers, is that when he adopted Chris, so that's his stepfather. When he adopted Chris, he changed his middle name and his last name to his name, which is, to me, weird. I mean, his name was Christopher something, and instead of just changing it to Christopher Byers, he changed it to Christopher Mark Byers. Yeah. Which I thought was kind of weird, but whatever, He was just always kind of present and lurking, it seemed like, And the second sketchy character is the stepfather of Stevie Branch, and his name is Terry Hobbs, and he has quite the history of violence. Said that he abused Stevie's mother, backhanded her, and we watched a video where he was kind of laughing about that and said she got what was coming to her.
Yeah.
Another thing about him was that night he was not home. He was also the last ones to see, and he wouldn't admit this.
Right.
He saw Stevie Branch and Christopher Byers and Michael Moore heading towards Robin Hood Hills at 6:30 p.m. and was seen riding their bikes.
Actually, one of them was on a bike, and the other two were running behind him.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was a witness that was going to church that night, and she knew what time it was. She knew what time she had to be at church that night. It was a Wednesday, so, and he.
She saw him and those kids.
She did.
Yeah.
He was getting on to those kids.
Yep.
During that time. He would not admit that. He would not admit that under interrogation. I mean, which was years later. They did not mess with him until years later. But he has that. He also broke into one of the neighbors' homes. An elderly lady I know her first name was Mildred. Not sure what her last name was, but she lived very close to Terry Hobbs. And one day she was taking a bath and he broke into the home. Went into her bathroom and she's screaming for him to leave, and he starts groping her breasts. And so that is fucked up.
Boy, he's a great one.
Right. Also, Stevie Branch's sister, Amanda, she claims that she was molested by Terry Hobbs her whole entire childhood that he was around.
Wow.
I know that Pamela Hobbs did end up leaving him pretty soon after this.
Mm-hmm.
And she even said that she questioned whether or not he did this, because 2 weeks before Stevie Branch and Michael Moore and Christopher Byers were murdered, he claims that he caught her kissing another man, Pamela, kissing another man, and he was very jealous of these kids.
Mm-hmm.
He was very jealous, and Stevie asked his mother to leave him 2 weeks before.
Mm-hmm.
He also was known to have picked Stevie up. You know, he had that blonde, spiky kind of hair, beautiful hair. Reminds me of our grandson's hair, so blonde. But he would pick him up by the top of the hair and punch him in the face. And in 2007, the Memphis Three were given another trial, and they found no DNA evidence that linked Terry Hobbs to that crime scene. There was an actual hair of Terry Hobbs, or could have been Terry Hobbs.
Yeah.
That was tied up into the shoelaces of these boys that were hogtied.
Yeah.
Very weird.
Yeah, the DNA results there were, that matched to 1.5% of the population, which is a big group of people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But that he fell into that group of people.
He did. While the DNA evidence could have linked Terry Hobbs to the crime scene, it didn't link Damien, Jason, or Jesse, Miss Kelly whatsoever.
No.
There was no link. Not only that, but Terry Hobbs was the very last person, like I said, to see these boys alive. Friends of the family say that Stevie was absolutely terrified of Terry Hobbs and didn't like him whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So we were talking about how Mark Byers was like to hoop and holler and carry on.
Right.
Well, after all this evidence came out in 2007 about the hair, Terry Hobbs, Mark Byers is screaming baby killer to Terry Hobbs now on TV, so that gave him a new focus.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gave him a new focus for a little while, but like I said, he did pass away a couple years ago. And even though he was a weirdo, I don't think he was involved in that. But I do know that at the night that Chris Byers was murdered, at 5:30 p.m., just maybe an hour before he was murdered or two, he was getting his ass beat by Mark Byers with a belt. So he had given him 3 licks to the butt for I don't know exactly what.
Yeah.
But with a belt. So to me, that's I don't like it. Natalie Maines from the Dixie Chicks went hard after Terry Hobbs. I mean, this is when she went hard. And Terry Hobbs in turn
Suitor.
her.
Mhm.
And Terry Hobbs in turn got absolutely nothing.
Right.
Absolutely nothing. And we watched some of that, where he was talking about he didn't want anything but to humiliate them.
Mm-hmm.
I
He
don't
wound
know.
up humiliating himself.
Exactly. So he didn't get a damn thing from that, as he shouldn't have. In 2008, the West Memphis Three was denied for a new trial again. In 2010, they were denied again. But luckily, November the 4th of 2011, the Supreme Court voted for a new evidentiary hearing for all three of the boys. The hearing was scheduled, but a plea deal was made in between that hearing time, and so
And
they
what would have been another case,
Right.
another court case. Yeah.
and the plea was an Alford plea. So the guys had to, we talked about an Alford plea before, and they had to say they were guilty, but
Wow.
maintain their innocence.
Yeah.
And Jason Baldwin did not like this.
No, Jason didn't want to do it.
But the reason why he said he did do this is because Damien was on death row, and he had to save his life.
It was the only thing that was going to get him out of there at that
Right.
time. But what a lot of people miss on this is the state of Arkansas and the attorneys, that represented them in that last trial. Let's just say there would have been a massive civil case after the fact.
Right.
And in this Alford plea, when they basically maintain their innocence but plead guilty, that keeps them from being able to go after them civilly, as far as I understand.
Yeah, they cannot.
Yeah, so they didn't get anything.
No, they got
After
nothing.
the fact. That's right. They didn't get anything out of getting out of this because they did the Alford plea.
So I believe it was August of 2011. These guys were released from an Arkansas prison after spending 18 years of their life there.
Yeah.
And that was more than they spent out. I mean, all of them pretty much. And that caused a wave of emotions too. Sadness. People were scared. Is this killer still out there?
Right.
But now there was an incident the night of May the 5th in 1993 at a truck stop behind Robin Hood Hills. Well, it wasn't a truck stop. I'm sorry. It was Bojangles. So a tall, slim, black man came into Bojangles and went into the women's bathroom, and he was covered in blood.
Right.
And mud.
Mm-hmm.
And when the manager called the police, she had just gotten a call from Michael Moore's parents that there was missing children or a missing child, and then she gets a phone call from Bojangles, and there's blood all over the bathroom. Well, instead of her going into this bathroom, she goes to the drive-through. Now, it was said during the trial that they did collect evidence from that bathroom.
Well, the initial cop that came by for that statement did not.
Right.
A couple of investigators came back by either hours or even the next day and got some blood scrapings that were left behind after they cleaned, and got more testimony from that manager about what happened and what they saw. But the blood samples were tested and otherwise inconclusive.
That's right. No, they weren't. No. They were lost. Remember?
That's right. And he admitted that he lost.
What's that guy's name? Brian? I can't remember what his last name was, but yeah, he admitted on the witness stand that they had lost that evidence from that bathroom. So that could have very well been some sick fuck that came through town and got these boys and did this to these boys. I mean,
and it would have exonerated the other three.
Exactly, and the step parents as well.
Yeah.
But so I mean, it could have been anyone, but to me, I felt like with the evidence they had, which wasn't just too much, that it fell kind of hard on Stevie Branch's stepfather, Terry Hobbs.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, there's a lot of information on this case. I mean, there really is, and I encourage anybody to go check it out and let us know what y'all think about it, because we did it and we found out a whole lot.
Well, and I'd just like to say that this is another example of, where small town law enforcement drops a ball on a pretty big case.
Right.
And, gosh, is that ego? Is it ego that they say to the FBI and the state police, we don't need your help, we got this. And then when it comes to court, it's just such a calamity of, evidence handling and interviews. And it's just ridiculous how this has gone, over a 18-year period.
Right.
But, in a lot of cases that we look at, we see that a lot of times it's those small town law enforcement authorities that drop the ball.
They drop the ball.
Yep.
Yeah, I wonder if that is what it is. If it's ego and it seems like it has to be because, and then it makes you wonder too, because they were under investigation at this time. And did they not want state police to go any further into what they were really doing? What the hell was really going on up there?
Yeah, speculation can take you anywhere when it comes to that. But yeah, again, they're already under investigation and their ego's bruised, and now it's about to be bloody.
Right.
So let's protect ourselves by losing evidence.
Or solving a huge case and getting the recognition that they got for this case when they really only put in not even half the work.
Well, and as much as I despise the way Mark Byers acted, I've got to give him props because he did get on national TV and apologize for acting the way he did.
Yes, he did.
And, he atoned for his sins, as he said. But, the truth is that was part of what was going on too. People get, blinders on to victims and suspects. Mm-hmm. And it causes problems in these investigations where the right path is not taken in a lot of cases because those blinders keep them from seeing those paths.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
And with that.
So that's the West Memphis 3 and the West Memphis 3.
Right. And a little bit of information about these guys now. I do know that Damian Eccles is married to one of his attorneys, right? Or
no, she was an architect in New York, and she moved to Little Rock several years before he got out, and they actually got married before he got out of prison. Yeah. Several years before he got out of prison, they were married quite a while.
Yeah, and Jason Baldwin, I know he's working a lot with the freedom of the Free the Innocent Act thing, the same thing that was done for him. He is paying back. Yeah. He's paying it forward. All three of these guys, and Jesse Miss Kelly, I believe, wanted a quiet, more private, life. But all three of these guys are tied to this case forever.
Sure.
And now that even though they had to claim that they were guilty, they are now looking very hard and wanting them to reopen this case and try to solve this case for these boys, because that's what's been forgotten in all of this is Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Chris Byers. Yep. And that is what has been forgotten. And I think that Damian Eccles and Jason Baldwin and Jesse Miss Kelly really do care. Mm-hmm. And really do want this solved. Mm-hmm. For them too. For themselves too. I mean, having to tote around that I'm guilty for this my whole entire life.
Yep.
It's not fun, I'm sure.
No.
So, thank y'all very much.
Thank you. Sweet thing. You're so beautiful. I love you.
I love you. Happy Father's Day.
I love doing this with you, and I can't wait till the next episode.
Me too.
This has been Walking Between Shadows. Again, I'm your host, Ben Elliott, and my wife, Taryn Elliott. Look for our next episodes coming soon, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button.